Susan Milan is professor of flute at the Royal College of Music and at Trinity Laban Conservatoire of Music and Dance in London. She has performed as principal flutist and as soloist with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, the London Philharmonic Orchestra, the London Symphony Orchestra, the Academy of St. Martin in the Fields, and many more. Here, she discusses Marcel Moyse, his impact on her playing and teaching, and his enduring legacy.
Quite an era, really, wasn't it? An extraordinary time for flute playing.
When did you first meet Moyse?
It must have been around 1965. I was in my second year at the Royal College of Music. I went to college very early. I went at 16. I got a scholarship. You can't do that anymore. You're not allowed to. But in those days, you could. So I left school at 16 and went to college. And when I was 18, I discovered that Moyse was still alive. I mean, I really didn't know. It's hard to understand that, isn't it? I mean, I studied with John Francis, who was a wonderful teacher, a mentor, and a very, very generous man. I mean, he taught me for a year free of charge when I was 11, took me under his wing, as he did Jimmy, he did James Goy too. And and so I was kind of under his umbrella all the time. And he never told me that Moyse was still around, you know. And then I went on a trip to Denmark as a student. I was playing with Clifford Benson, the wonderful Clifford Benson. And we were there with various other students from the Royal College of Music. And I met... And he said to me, well, Susan, you really ought to go and see Marcel Moyse. And I said, but is he still alive? And he said, oh, yes. And he's giving a course in Bosville in Switzerland. And you need to contact William Bennett because he's been to the first one. And so I then did contact Wib. I'd never met him. I was at the Royal College of Music then. Wib was already professional. You know, he was considerably older than me. And I just phoned him up, as one does when one is young and you have no sort of barriers. And I asked him about it, and he said, yes, you should come. And so I did. And I went the next year, the following year, which is when I was 18, I got on a train from London to Zurich. I had no money. I sat up all night on a train and took the train to Zurich, and I was met by Laurie Kennedy, a wonderful young flute player, died very early. He was at the course. And I was taken to the church where Moyse was giving his lessons. And I can remember walking in because you could have heard a pin drop because nobody dared to make a noise when he was teaching. And if you walked in and he saw you and you were making a noise, he really was quite fierce. He could be very fierce, but he could also be very kind. And anyway, I went in. I was very young then. I was probably one of the youngest there. And there was Wib and Trevor and DeBost and Rumpel popped in and Nicolay popped in. And of course, I didn't know any of these people. I was very green. I was terribly naive, hopelessly naive. I didn't know any of these people. And this was probably a great advantage because I wasn't as scared as I would have been if I'd known who they were. And so that was my introduction to Moyse. And I introduced myself to him. I was very brazen in those days and terribly confident until I played to him. And then I was not confident at all after that. And I remember introducing myself and saying, oh, I studied with John Francis. And he was kind of went, you know, who's he? Which is very naughty of me. And he had given him some lessons, I think, during the war. And so I went to Moyse and I was totally green and very, very inexperienced, but extremely confident because my teacher told me I was the best flute player in the world. And then I played to Moyse and I realized I wasn't the best flute player in the world. It was as simple as that. I mean, he absolutely, completely knocked me sideways. You know, with Moyse, I went from being a duck to being a swan, literally, in a space of about 3 years. First of all, I was a duck. You're a duck. You talk like a duck. You're terrible. You know, you're awful. And I thought, oh my God. And then the following year I came and I'd improved. And then the following year I came and he said I was a great artist. So I went from being, you know, a duck to a swan, which was an extraordinary experience with him, a tremendous journey. And then I continued to go and see him as often as I could, but I was then professional because I was in an orchestra when I was 21. And when we used to travel, and even when I was with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, if we were in that part of the world, I would go and see him if I could. Yeah.
What were some of the things you did that sort of took you from being a duck to being a swan?
Well, first of all, I mean, he didn't like my articulation, and he was absolutely right. I mean, none of us in that era, at that time of flute playing in Britain, we were still kind of on the cusp of using vibrato and metal flutes, you know. I mean, there was still, in the 1950s, there were still people playing wooden flutes with no vibrato in Britain. Not many, but there were. So the whole French style thing was very new. And so we had to sort of catch up. I remember Jimmy saying to me, I didn't realize how fast you could play on the flute till I went to hear these young French flute players. And then we were all decided we were going to be able to play fast. But this was a very new thing. And playing on metal flutes and playing with vibrato and all those sort of tone color things that Moyse taught was very new then, very new. And although, of course, all his books were available, but we hadn't been exposed to it in the way we were with Moyse actually teaching us how to do this, not how to do it. This is another thing. He never taught technically, you see. He didn't talk technically at all. However, when he criticized my articulation, he then invited me to have a lesson privately with him. And that's where people misunderstand Moyse, or maybe slightly, occasionally misrepresent him. Because people say he was cruel, and he was very direct. And I always think that part of the reason he was so direct was because his English was not very good. So he was a man of few well-chosen words. So to say, you sound like a duck, that was, you know, how he expressed that. And it really had impact. He said, oh my God, this is, and it had impact. And yes, okay, so he could be very direct, and sometimes it was quite hard for the students. On the other hand, he could also be extremely kind. And he took me aside, he gave me a 1-hour lesson on French articulation, which I will never forget. And that was more technical, or in the sense that it was more analytical. But in his classes, he never did that. He didn't waste his time doing analysis. What Moyse wanted to do, he wanted to make you into an imaginative, visualizing musician who understood what you wanted to say with the music. That was his thing. And he was incredible at that. Absolutely incredible. And he never took it back to technical. He never said, well, but how you get this phrasing is you do this with the embouchure or you support with the diaphragm. I never heard him use the word diaphragm. You know, he never did that. It was always, the moon is coming up, the sun is going down, the river is flowing, you're in love, you're walking in a garden. You know, it was this. It was always poetic. And that was what I found incredibly refreshing and inspirational about him, is that we weren't just talking about where the tongue is in the mouth and whether you were breathing properly. We were talking about music and what it meant for us and why we do it, and you know how we want to communicate with sound. That was his thing, communicating with sound. It's fantastic, absolutely fantastic. You know, you just sat there in awe of what he was doing with some of the young people who played, who hadn't yet kind of developed that imagination, or anywhere near the imagination that he had with sound and with music. And of course, his experience in the opera must have totally added to that. It must have. All his books, his Tone Development Through Interpretation that you were asking me about, it's all about operatic arias. And of course, he was in Paris Opera. So he heard Björling, he heard Gili, Callas, all these great singers singing these arias. And that must have inspired him and made him think, well, you know, the flute player should be able to express these things in the same way, with tone color, with you know, with phrasing, with inflection, all these things that he was so totally brilliant at. One of the main things I took away was don't go tucka tucka, but go dugga dugga. And this allows you, in the end, if you practice it enough with double tonguing or even single tonguing, it allows you to be much faster and much more fluid. And this brings the embouchure forward, gets it in the right place, and it makes everything really fluid. That was the only, in a way, the only technical thing I think I took away from him. But of course, after I left that particular Moyse course, I mean, Jimmy was there. Jimmy came up to me and said, look, Sue, you've got to change teachers and go to Geoffrey Gilbert. And so Geoffrey had heard me play, and I didn't leave my teacher straight away because I did not want to do that, because he'd been very good to me and I was not prepared to just put him in the bin. You know, I didn't want to hurt his feelings, so I stayed with him for that year, and then I went to Geoffrey. And Geoffrey was also extraordinary at teaching technically. I mean, he was absolutely brilliant. So the combination of the Moyse thing, which kind of led me in that direction, if you like, or pointed out what I really needed to learn, and then going to Geoffrey, who was the most fantastic diagnostician ever. It was a great combination. I was very fortunate. Amazing.
What were some of the things you learned from him?
I learned how to teach in his style, and then I combined it. I feel that what I tried to do, endeavored to do, well, I succeeded not, is to combine my experience in Moyse, which is coming from the point of view of poetry, you know, of lyrics, of opera, of what we're trying to say, of communicating that, plus the technique that you need to do it, because you can't do one without the other. So Geoffrey was really technical. I had 1 year of nothing but technique. I literally didn't play him a single piece. I had scales every day and every week, studies, went through massive numbers of studies, and the Moyse books and the articulation books, and we discussed and analyzed. He analyzed, and I took on board as much as I could of everything he did teach me. And then I got a job in an orchestra. And I seriously don't think I would have done if I had not had that combination of Moyse and Geoffrey. Yeah, it's my very, very good fortune. And John, my first teacher too, because he literally took me under his wing at the age of 11. So I've been very lucky. It's a true story of how you can be very fortunate through people's kindness and generosity. You know, Moyse, when I went to him for the second time, because my knees were knocking, you know, I played in the joueur, Marcel Moyse. And so I thought, well, I'm going to show this guy, you know, okay, so I can't articulate the way he thinks I should. Okay, fine. But I'm going to get up and I'm going to play something and I'm going to really impress these guys. So I took the third study of the Anderson Opus 15. Okay, no. You know, this one. And I thought, right, and I practiced it. I made practice, and I played it really fast. And I played it to him. This is the second time I played it, and my knees were knocking, I tell you. And they were all watching me because they all knew what he was going to say, because they'd seen him before. And Trevor and Wim must have been laughing themselves silly, because the third study of Anderson was his favourite study. And he taught it in a very, very specific way, very lyrical. It wasn't anything about speed. And I played this, and I played this, and I thought, right, that's it. And I showed him I could play fast. And he said, why do you play so fast? And I said, why do you play so fast? Why do you play so fast? And he kept saying, that's what he used to do. He used to repeat, hammer it home. You tongue like a duck, you tongue like a duck. Why do you play so fast? And so I said, well, Mr. Moyse, I said, I'm actually very nervous. He said, why are you nervous? The old dog. Anyway, and then the following year I went to him and I played the Iber pièce. And I'd had a year. I didn't change professors, but you know, when you go to a course like that with someone as inspirational as that and as brilliant as a player, he never played in the class, but he was one of the most brilliant players of that generation, of course. And when you've been saturated with that and inspired and uplifted by that, you take it away with you, and it lasted me a whole year. I had all my notes on what he'd done, and I didn't need them because I remembered everything. I total recall. And I just worked and worked on the things that he had taught us all there, that he had discussed, all the things he'd said. And it made you think. It made you think about music. It made you think about sound. It made you think about why you were doing it, you know? Why are we doing it? And so, and he said, oh, you have changed professor. And I said, no, Mr. Moyse, I haven't changed professor yet, but I am going to Geoffrey Gilbert next year. He went, you know, and then, and he was very nice about the pièce. That was, I hadn't quite become a swan then, but I was on the way. And that Christmas, he sent me a Christmas card. I've still got it. I've got it in a book, you know. And in red, he put all the minor thirds going up, you know, the minor thirds. Yes. And he put at the top, he put Happy Christmas. I remember very well your Iber pièce and the minor thirds. And then he'd written them like this. And then underneath he said, do not be so nervous. And you see, he didn't have to do that. That was kindness. That was, you know, picking me up off the floor. He was a kind person in so many ways. You know, it was a great journey. It was really a meaningful journey in my life for 3 years. He was very clever. He understood his flute so well. He knew which areas needed to be worked on in a specific way. You know, the middle register, he knew how to get around that, and he knew how to work on elasticity in playing. Elasticity was his great thing. You know, being able to play a phrase that was just fluid and didn't have bar lines and didn't have beats. He was absolutely amazing at that. I think the Tone Developments for Interpretation, which sadly went out of print, I'm not sure if have they printed it again? And I also have a copy of his original one. Have you ever seen that?
No.
This is his writing. Have you seen his writing? It all looks like this. Meticulous writing, and his handwriting too. Look at this. It is beautiful, isn't it? And it's so him, because even that is beautiful, isn't it? And this book is different. It has different things in it. It's not, but it probably was the basis of his Tone Developments for Interpretation, the one that we're so fond of. And he used to, you know, we went through those at the courses, of course. And I think there is definitely still a place for those. And one of the problems we have is that students don't listen anymore. Listening is so different from hearing. And they don't concentrate and they don't listen. And you can listen to those arias sung by some famous tenor or soprano, yes. But the question is, will they understand what the music is about? And unless they are discerning enough and passionate enough to learn, to find out what the lyrics are, what the context is of that aria within the opera, and what this singer is actually saying. Is he saying, I love you to death and I really can't live without you? Or is he saying, please God, help me to go to heaven? What is he saying? If they don't know what he's saying, how can they interpret this music in the right emotive way? And this is what Moyse was so brilliant at, you see, because he understood all of these arias, and he made us all understand the context. So I think there is very much a place, but they need to be studied in a very special way and a detailed way. And so those of us who've been to Moyse and heard him teach them need to be able to teach our students how to listen to those properly and how to interpret them. So I think, yes, I think tone development through interpretation is really relevant, but I think it's relevant for very advanced students. I think they need to be able to play really well, and then you teach them how to communicate in the way a singer communicates the emotions of that aria or the message of that aria.
Vibrato, no vibrato. What is your take on Moyse's vibrato idea?
You're kind of asking the wrong. So many people ask me this, you know, and honestly, I don't know why flute players are so obsessed with whether we should or shouldn't play with vibrato. I've never understood it, because I mean, I don't think I'm capable of playing without vibrato unless I really, really have practice and stop everything wobbling around. I find it really, really hard to play without vibrato, and I don't like it either. So why should I do it? And okay, if you're going to play a Baroque flute and you think you are convinced by whatever literature you've read about 18th century music that they all played without vibrato, I mean, did they really? Do we know that? Then no, we don't know that. I mean, Cobbs talked about vibrato. Maybe he didn't like it very much. I don't know. But I find it really hard to believe that physiologically everybody in the 18th century played without vibrato. I find that really difficult to believe.
Yeah,
but
I agree.
It may be true. So I'm not saying, I'm not a specialist in this. Personally, I don't like playing without vibrato unless it's required by contemporary music, or unless it's within a chord in an orchestral situation where you don't want to stick out like a sore thumb, or it doesn't seem appropriate. Okay, there are times, but if I want to be expressive, I don't feel I can really be expressive. And personally, when I joined the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, I was fascinated, always fascinated by the string players. And if you watch string players, they very rarely play without vibrato. They play with vibrato all the time, because it's an integral part of their sound. And I like to think that my vibrato is also an integral part of my sound. It's part of my personality. I think one of the great things I learned from Moyse was perseverance, you know. In his heart of hearts, he was a great teacher and mentor, and he really wanted to get the best out of students. He really wanted them to understand what he was saying and be able to play in a magical way. He was a magical flute player. One of the great things I remember about him is him getting up and dancing to the Doppler Hungarian fantasy. And he put his hands together like this, and he was doing a Russian dance, a Hungarian dance, you know. And he would talk about it being around the fire and the, you know, and the gypsy violins, and you had this fantastic sort of visual aspect of his teaching, which I think any of us who went to him, we all tried to do that with our students, because it was so inspirational and gave such meaning to what we were playing. It made sense of everything, you know. And he always persevered until the student somehow, even if it was just a tone exercise like de la sonorité, you hear him do de la sonorité, and he would hit those first two notes so many times, and you think, oh gosh, how many times is he going to do this? Until that student understood what he really wanted from the sound. That's what he was about, sound. And the 24 melodic, 25 melodic, You know, we think they're easy. They're not easy. They're really hard. What he asked people to do with those was have imagination. He wanted them to get inside the sound and make it into something really special, even though it was the simplest possible melody. And he was so good at that. And that's the thing I took away from him mostly. He always had this fantastic twinkle in his eyes. You know, he had these eyes which completely lit up. And he was full of life. Even when he was really old, he was still passionate about playing, about music, not just playing the flute, music, you know. And this is what he gave to me and to so many other people, a love of music, not just playing the flute. Yeah, yeah, what a great person. There are so many young people now who don't even know who Marcel Moyse was. But they don't know who Rampal was either. And some of them don't even know who Jimmy was now. They're not looking back enough at the great flute players like Moyse and Rampal in particular. Rampal, one of the truly great French flute players ever. There are also, you know, some extremely wonderful, I mean, some great early English flute players. Don Amadio, people like that, and they were absolute virtuosos, and I sometimes play them to my students, and they're remarkable and musically absolutely extraordinary. And I so wish that students would listen to those. I wish we could impress on them to study his books on sound and on articulation. He wrote loads of books on articulation, how to taking little snippets, you know, his école d'articulation is just one bar phrase and repetition, and in a way that's so practical. He was so practical, as well as being a great artist. I played one of the tone developments for interpretation, the Mendelssohn Rondo Concerto. And he was on the platform. I was on the platform. He was on the platform. There was a whole church full of people, and somebody recorded it, the lesson he gave me, and I have it on cassette. And it's really, you can't hear it so well because it's very boomy, that little church. It was very resonant, but when I listened to it, just to hear the tone of his voice, because his voice when he spoke, let alone when he sang, it was so rich. It was Piaf, you know, you had this kind of whoa, fast vibrato. Yes, but to hear the resonance in his voice when he's singing is beautiful. It's really rich, it's beautiful. Every piece from Moyse told a story. And this is so true. And it's something we should never forget. Bye for now. Bye.